You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. This is day 2 of KWAZ. Tonight we're going to do a reading along the lines of self-determination. If you're watching me live or watching on YouTube, you can see on my screen, we're talking about the Arusha Declaration, right? We're talking about the Arusha Declaration, Tanzania's New Revolution. This is a document written in 1967. On this show, you've heard us talking a lot about one particular person, and that would be President Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, formerly of Tanganyika. And you've heard some of these terms that are, some of the names of places like TANU, which is Tanganyika African National Union. You've heard of Julius Nyerere. You've heard of his usage of African Socialism. We're going to read this document, the Arusha Declaration, that basically is Tanzania's most prominent political statement of its African socialism. For those of you who are in the know, if you think it's strange that I'll read this paper on this night of KWAZ instead of on the Ujamaa night, well, self-determination is the theme of the second night of KWAZ, and this document really spells out the steps or the plan of self-determination, right, in creating or establishing the country of Tanzania. So I wanted to read this tonight, and we could always follow President Nyerere on Ujamaa night as well. Before I get into the show, I want to do two things. I want to thank all of you who came by last night and discuss, as we had the open discussion on unity. Did we answer the question? Did we solve the problem? No. But it wasn't intended to solve the problem. What was intended was to discuss some of the ways in which we can go about unifying our people. And at the end of it, it's clear as well that, perhaps maybe you don't get to unite everyone. So, it was a good discussion. A lot of people came through, voiced their opinions, gave their thoughts. I want to thank all of you again for doing that. I appreciate you. Also, I want to remind you guys to check out the other shows on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the Pro-Black Perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Yes, indeed. So, okay, now that we've done that, shout out to the folks who are listening in live with me today. Let's talk about. Let's read through this declaration, the Arusha Declaration, Tanzania's New Revolution. We have been oppressed a great deal. We have been exploited a great deal. And we have been disregarded a great deal. It is our weakness that has led to our being oppressed, exploited, and disregarded. We now intend to bring about a revolution which will ensure that we are never again victims of these things. The Arusha Declaration. That's a strong opening statement. And you know, that's something I should take into consideration too. Whenever you are presenting, you have to open up strong, right? You have to start off real strong. And you know, that's something I'll be taking into consideration in the new year as far as this podcast goes. You know, opening statement, just strong, just right to the point, in your face. Bam. Okay. There could be no doubting the popular response to the blueprint for advanced socialism adopted by the National Executive Committee of the Tanganyika African National Union, also known as TANU, meeting at Arusha from January 26 to 29th. The Arusha Declaration touched off an immediate mass response. In Dar es Salaam and other centers, the workers poured out into the streets in spontaneous mass demonstrations of welcome and support. Their intentions were clear. Socialism was the direction in which they wanted their leaders to lead. Now you got to remember in that statement that Africa, right, and Africans live a lifestyle, right, that one could mistaken for socialism. We've talked about it here on the show a lot. You know, that Ubuntu, that communalism that they live. You know, one could mistaken that socialism and is some equivalent of the African tradition of communalism. And so I think a lot of Africans probably would have supported this idea based on the way they already lived. To continue, within days of the Arusha Declaration of Principles, the government of Tanzania took bold and decisive action. President Nyerere's words, since February 5th, we have nationalized all banks, except for the cooperative bank. We have taken into public ownership the following firms which are engaged in the processing of foods normally purchased from the National Agricultural Products Board. A list of 8 big mills and other food processing enterprises is given. We have nationalized the National Insurance Corporation. As from February 11th, all new life insurance will be handled by this corporation. Other types of insurance business will also be handled exclusively by the NIC. Then, to form the nucleus of the State Trading Corporation, which will be the authorized body for external and wholesale trade, we have nationalized the following firms. And they give a list of 8 major trading firms. We shall pay full and fair compensation for assets acquired and honor all existing commitments. All right, that's the public ownership in Tanzania, Sunday News, 12/2/67. President Nyerere stated that while this was a complete list of firms to be nationalized in terms of the Arusha Declaration, it was intended through negotiation to acquire controlling government share in a further list of private industrial firms. It was also intended to secure a controlling interest in the sisal industry for the government. Sisal is a plant that they make into rope, right? While there would continue to be a place for private enterprise in Tanzania's economy, the key positions of the economy have been secured for the nation. The Arusha Declaration is not just a high-sounding manifesto. It is a working resolution to guide a working political organization. You see, I like that, right? It is a working manifesto. it is a working resolution to guide a working political organization. I like that. It is more than a statement of aims. It is a springboard from which the TANU government launched a dynamic movement to reshape Tanzania. It is in this light, and not as an abstract or doctrinaire series of generalizations, that we should consider the terms of the declaration. It's funny that they would mention that is not abstract or doctrinaire when they're supporting socialism in a doctrinaire way. The document opens with a restatement of the aims already embodied in the TANU Constitution, which, in addition to general principles of human rights, democracy, African unity, and world peace, such as one would expect in the objectives of a national liberation movement, contains a number of specifically socialist directions. The TANU Creed declares that all citizens together possess all the natural resources of the country in trust for their descendants. Right? You know, I could, although that's steeped in a socialist mindset, I like it, because as I talked about last night and many times in the past, we tend to leave the next generation start from zero, start from scratch. And a lot of our leadership, like if you go through the continent, through the Caribbean, a lot of the leadership, especially like in the Caribbean, they sell out the country. They sell it to foreigners. And so there's nothing for, you know, the future generations to really stand on. You sold it out. And here we see that they want to make sure that the resources of the country, its lifeblood, right, is in trust for their descendants. Next, that in order to ensure economic justice, the state must have effective control over the principal means of production. That it is the responsibility of the state to intervene actively in the economic life of the nation, to prevent the exploitation of one person by another, one group by another, and so as to prevent the accumulation of wealth to an extent which is inconsistent with the existence of a classless society. So that's an interesting statement. As you guys have heard me talk about in the past, there's nothing wrong with accumulating wealth, right? To a certain extent, right? So this is why you'll never hear me personally say that I'm just dogmatic, anti-capitalist or whatever. I in fact believe that black folks need to become a little bit more capitalist, and you could do that without putting profits over people. You can make your money through the tools and the through the vehicles that capitalism has out there, and you don't have to exploit anyone, right? But because at the end of the day, you gotta make sure that you pull your family up and make sure that they are strong into the next generation. And because Africans, in my opinion, tend to have shied away from being competitive, right, in the system, right, while not also being, these hardcore imperialists themselves or what have you, right? But because you haven't been playing the game, so to speak, I think we've suffered heavily because of it. And I think that's what has allowed things like religion and religious dogma to really hold us, right? I think it's because, we've taken this stance that money is the root of all evil, when in fact, money is how you're going to gain and retain power, resources, right? Not necessarily fiat currency, but resources, right? Capital. It is clear that the meeting at Arusha considered that these general statements of principle need to be made more precise, amplified, and put into practice. That is just what the second part of the declaration sets out to do. It begins by setting out four major essentials of a socialist policy. These are A, the absence of exploitation. Tanzania is a state of workers and peasants, says the declaration, but it is not yet a socialist state. It still has elements of capitalism and feudalism, right? A true socialist state will do away with these elements. It will not have two classes of people, a lower class consisting of people who work for their living, and an upper class consisting of those who live on other people's labor. In a socialist state, no person will exploit another. Everyone who is able to work does so and gets a fair income for his labor, and incomes do not differ substantially. You know, this is a great thought. This is a great thought. The thing is, though, what happens to the innovators? What happens to those people who can create, right? Who can conjure, who can produce outside of the norm? What I'm saying is, what happens to the entrepreneur? The person who, let's say, the person who created a new type of car engine, right? That person is supposed to receive the same income as everyone else? Nah. Go back to my episode I did a long time ago about ego and stuff like that. You know, the whole idea of compensation. You see, that's the problem. We don't know how to separate stuff. You know, compensation is not a problem. If I do extra work, I should get extra pay. If while I'm going to work in the farm, I'm still at night tinkering in my shop and I figure out how to make a new machine that makes farming even more efficient or something like that, right? You can't tell me that I have to be, you know, compensated or not really compensated much for my endeavors. Now listen, I'm still saying this in the mind frame of Ubuntu and communalism, etc. Right? The way I see it is that your economic system should be one where everyone gets their basic needs met. And if you do extra, you get extra. So I hope you guys understand what I'm saying. Right? An economic system should be where every African, right, has his or her needs met completely. Right? And there shouldn't be two classes of two or more classes of people, but there should be the understanding that some people will do more than other people. And even though it's all for the group, you're gonna have to differentiate, you know, people who are real producers. I hope that makes sense. B, co-workers and peasants control of the means of production. The way to build and maintain socialism is to ensure that the major means of production are under the control and ownership of the peasants and the workers themselves through their government and their cooperatives. You know, when Europeans talk about this stuff, that's through the government thing, this part here, through the government and their cooperative, that's a major pitfall of socialism when you hear Europeans talking about it. It means that the government is major in the affairs. And the government is sort of a gatekeeper at times, or most times, right, between these so-called means of production and the people. The major means of production are defined as land, forest, mineral resources, water, oil and electricity, communications, transport, banks, insurance, import and export trade, wholesale business, the steel machine, tool, arms, motor car, cement and fertilizer factories, the textile industry, and any other big industry upon which a large section of the population depends for its living, or which provides essential components for other industries, large plantations, especially those which produce essential raw materials. You see this list here too? This list is something to study. And it's something that, if we're smart, we will start to angle ourselves as entrepreneurs in these industries, because the knowledge that you'll gain in angling yourself in these industries can be put to use later on when we're talking about nation building in Africa. This is something, what I'm saying is, this is something that you could get into generational businesses, right? Business where you own it, your children own it, their children own it, if you get into these areas right here. So this is something you should think about. C is democracy. But nationalization is not necessarily socialism, as the Declaration points out. West European welfare state theorists have vulgarized the meaning of the term and equated policies of nationalization in a country dominated by capitalism with socialism. TANU rejects such illusions. State is not socialist simply because all the major means of production are controlled and owned by the government. It is necessary for the government to be elected and led by peasants and workers. But in reality, that never happens, right? If the racist governments of Rhodesia and South Africa were to bring the major means of production in these countries under their control and direction, this would entrench exploitation. It would not bring about socialism. There cannot be true socialism without democracy. D, socialism and ideology. Finally, the Declaration makes the key point that socialism can only be built by those who firmly believe in a socialist ideology and are prepared to put its principles into practice. Internationalism and the universal validity of scientific socialist principles are both implicit in this paragraph, which points out that the fellow believers in the political and economic faith of socialism are those in Africa and elsewhere who fight for the rights of the peasants and workers. A true member of TANU is a socialist. The first duty of TANU member, and especially of TANU leader, is to live by these principles in his day-to-day life. In particular, a TANU leader should never live in on another's labor. Neither should he have capitalist or feudalist tendencies. So here's a question for you guys. I don't know if there's anyone in the chat room, but if you're an entrepreneur and you hire two people to work in your business, are you exploiting them? Because I've never, it to me is in public discourse, there's always been a hate, like a gray area there, right? Are you exploiting them? Right? The exceptional weight attached to this conception is evident from the practical decisions in the final section of the Declaration, the Arusha Resolution itself, to which we shall refer below. Here, the precise qualifications for TANU and government leadership are defined with a strictness and rigidity which should preclude the unfortunate experiences of other African countries where, despite proclaimed loyalty to socialism, the self-enrichment of party and government leaders led to the growth of a bureaucratic bourgeoisie element and nourished the seeds of counter-revolution. So that brings us to a section called Balanced Development and Self-Reliance. Part 3 of the Declaration consists of a closely reasoned and self-critical analysis of some of the most crucial questions facing Tanzania, and not only Tanzania, on the path of independent development. All the countries of the world, which is a result of the domination of imperialism and colonialism, lag behind economically, and hence in standards of living, education, health, and welfare, are striving as rapidly as possible to overcome the gap. Lacking internal resources, capital accumulation, and state expenditure on public services, many of them have placed the main emphasis on external aid. Attention has been concentrated on industries while neglecting agriculture and the rural areas. The Arusha Declaration boldly challenges this balance of concentration. In the past, it admits money has been seen by the TANU leadership as the answer to almost every problem. By our thoughts, words, and actions, it appears as if we have come to the conclusion that without money, we cannot bring about the revolution. It is as if we had all agreed to speak with one voice, saying, if we get money, we shall develop. Without money, we cannot develop. The thing is, though, see, this is the doctrinaire, this is just the socialist doctrinaire type stuff I was talking about. The reality is you do need money and resources to build, right? Think about like a poor person. How are they gonna get out of the doldrums, right? They gotta do the things that can get them access to more and more capital, right? Everything, water conservation plans, housing, schools, roads, economic progress, all will seem to turn on the question of getting somewhere, somehow, money to make it possible. If one calls on the government to spend more, one is in effect calling on the government to increase taxes. We realize that the cow has no more milk. We know that the cow would like to have more milk herself so that her calves could drink it, or which could be sold to provide more comfort for itself or its calves. But knowing all the things which could be done with more milk does not alter the fact that the cow has no more. Can the shortfall then not be made up by outside aid? It would be even more stupid for us to imagine that we shall rid ourselves of our poverty through foreign financial assistance rather than our own financial resources. And this is what I agree with right here, right? There is no country in the world, which is prepared to give us gifts or loans or establish industries to the extent that we would be able to achieve all our development targets. Even if it were possible, is this what you really want? Independence means self-reliance. Independence cannot be real if a nation depends upon gifts and loans from another for its development. It would be improper for us to accept such assistance without asking ourselves how this would affect our independence and our very survival as a nation. And that I agree with 100%. If not gifts, what about loans? Loans are better than free gifts. A loan is intended to increase our efforts or make those efforts more fruitful. But even loans have the limitations. You have to give consideration to the ability to repay. To burden the people with big loans, the repayment of which will be beyond their means, is not to help them, but to make them suffer. It's even worse when the loans they are asked to repay have not benefited the majority of the people, but have only benefited a small minority. And that is the thing, again, this document is from 1967. And so therefore, there's no excuse for leaders in Africa, for leaders in African satellite countries like the Caribbean and whatnot. There's no reason for you guys, right? Speaking to these leaders now, there's no reason for you guys to be taking these loans. This wisdom was dropped on us long ago. And as a part of the steps for you to become leaders in some of these same countries, where you had this wisdom, given to you, and for you to go and still sell the people down, down the river, right, to sell them out, it means that you knew what you were doing. And that's the thing. We got to get these punks who are leaders in these countries, we got to get them up out of there. And we got to make sure that who we replace them with is people who we raised. And I'm talking about, pro-black, pan-African, black national, etc. But who we raised. Not folks who were raised by the same people we're trying to get out of there. So then the next question, are foreign investments. We need these enterprises. We have even passed an act of parliament protecting foreign investments. Even if we were able to convince foreign investors and foreign firms to undertake all the projects and programs of economic development that we need, is this what we actually want to happen? Would we have agreed to leave the economy of our country in the hands of foreigners who would take the profits back to their countries? How can we build the socialism we are talking about under such circumstances? And thus, by a process of elimination, TANU comes practically to the policy it calls self-reliance. The realization that in the building of socialism, outside aid is at worst negative or inimical, at best, hopefully inadequate. Self-reliance means self-reliance, right? It means yourself. You do it yourself. You rely on yourself. They face not merely an economic task of development, but also a political task of consolidating and securing the nation's independence. And this, whether easy or not, must be done in the end of ends by the people themselves, relying on their own resources. And that's a message for black folks everywhere. You have no friends, and nor should you really be looking for any. You see what's going on. You know where we want to be, where we need to get to. We need to work together to get there. As we talked about last night in the open discussion, we need to learn our people, learn ourselves, right? We need to create the milestones and give ourselves the small victories, and those things will start to bring us together as a team. Because that's really what we want. We want team play at this point. We want team members. We want team play. We want team activity. So we got to treat what we're doing in that manner, in a kind of scientific and business manner. We got to understand the psychology of people. I asked a question last night, and I see only Tassé talked about it today on his warship. But do we really know an African? What makes the African tick? Do we really know them? Do we really know the Africans in the Caribbean? And so we got or the Africans in America. We got this work to do. We got to understand, and we have to engage along the lines of our understanding. We already have the common goal. We have to engage one another now and understand who we are. Work together, string together some small victories, and then we'll see something really happen for us, right? But there's no room for us to be trying to get to know some Hispanic, some Asian, or some Palestinian, or something. And that's my biggest complaint about this African socialism idea. It's too social. It wants to tie in the struggle with everyone else who's struggling. And these everyone else's will call you the N-word in a second. Right? So we got to stop that. So let's get to the section now called Peasants and Industry. Along what lines then does Tanzanian development lie? With its starting point, self-reliance of a desperately poor people. The dilemma is where to concentrate in town or country or on industry or agriculture. Because of our emphasis on money, we have made another big mistake. We have put too much emphasis on industries. It is a mistake because we do not have the means to establish many modern industries. We do not have either the necessary finances or the technical know-how. So that brings us back to curriculum, right? It is not enough to say that we shall borrow the finances and the technicians from other countries. Even if we could get the necessary assistance, dependence on it could interfere with our policy of socialism. The policy of inviting a chain of capitalists to come and establish industries in our country might succeed in giving us all the industries we need, but it would also succeed in preventing the establishment of socialism, unless we believe that without first building capitalism, we cannot build socialism. I've long ago, I've pondered that very question. Long ago. If the economic, I'm talking 20 years ago, right? I pondered if there wasn't a two-step solution of build capitalists and then continue as socialists, right? I do believe that the real answer is that there's an African-centered mix or African-centered midline between these two concepts that will work best for us. The Arusha Declaration accordingly turns TANU's face resolutely towards the countryside and the peasantry. One of the special consequences of earlier concentration on industry has been an inevitable simultaneous concentration on urban development. We cannot establish an industry in each village and through this means affect a rise in the real income of the people. We spend most of our money in the urban areas and our industries are established in the towns. Yet the greater part of this money that we spend in the towns comes from loans. Whether it is used to build schools, hospitals, houses, or factories, it still has to be repaid. But it is obvious that it cannot be repaid just out of money obtained from urban and industrial development. To repay the loans, we have to use foreign currency, which is obtained from the sale of our exports. but we do not sell our industrial products in foreign markets, and indeed, it is likely to be a long time before our industries produce for export. It is therefore obvious that the foreign currency we shall use to pay back the loans will not come from the towns or the industries. Where shall we get it from? We shall get it from the villages and from agriculture. Those who benefit directly from development are not the ones who will repay the loans. Those who benefit directly from development are not the ones who will repay the loans. Thus, the danger arises of another form of exploitation. I was just thinking it too. That of the countryside by the towns. For while the industries, hospitals, roads, electricity, piped water, and other urban developments did not directly benefit the farmer, they were paid for by the foreign exchange earned by the sale of his produce. If we are not careful, we might get to the position where the real exploitation is that of the town dwellers exploiting the peasants. And it's funny, I was just thinking that after reading that last line of the previous paragraph. Well, then how do you stop the exploitation of the farmers? That is why the Declaration emphasizes, let us be concerned about the peasant farmer. You know, something to consider, right? Is the idea that regardless to what you do, when we talk about economics, regardless of what you do, someone will be exploited. Someone will be exploited. And I think the thing is, as this declaration kind of mentioned briefly earlier on, I think the thing is you want to keep it close. In other words, you don't want to exploit them crazy, whoever it is. You know, there will be some exploitation. The way I see economics, period, and economies, period, someone's gonna get, the smaller hand. And I think it's imperative to make sure that it's not an overwhelmingly smaller hand. For those of you who have joined me today, thank you. Make sure to hit the like. If you're new here today, hit subscribe, click the bell so you can be notified when I'm on. I'll be on live for the next few nights. As it's Kwanzaa, I'm doing a show every night of Kwanzaa. I'll be on at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so make sure you click the bell to be reminded. Set a reminder yourselves as well. And once again, I want to thank you guys for taking time out to join me tonight. To continue, of course, it should not be assumed from the above that Tanyu has turned his back either on industrialization or on external aid. This is a question of emphasis. Certainly, industrialization is the goal. The day we become industrialized, we shall be able to say we are developed. But the goal is not the starting point. The mistake we are making is to think that development begins with industries. But the basis of development is agriculture, which is sound. Right? That's a sound thought. Tanzania is more than 10 million people. A great part of its 362,000 square miles of territory is fertile and gets sufficient rain. It produces food crops, some of which can be exported, and cash crops. The country is suitable for animal husbandry. The lakes, rivers, and coastal waters abound in fish. The only road to develop the country, to get more food and more money for every Tanzanian, is to make the fullest use of these natural resources, to increase agricultural production. That's one of the things, like in my hometown, right? I'm from a place where there's many islands, and And a lot of those islands is arable land that folks weren't really doing anything. And to be like such a small country, right, that's spread out over all these islands, you would think the government would have pushed to get the youth, right, a part of the education. And when I went to school, there was agriculture taught in school, no doubt about it. But only a few people really took those classes. But to see that the government institute a program to get more of the youths, who might not be interested in some of the tougher subjects in school, for example, right? But to kind of steer them into agriculture, and then from there steer them into, this land that was available, right? It's a shame. A couple of years ago, it was making headlines how the Chinese were buying up all this land, some of these small islands, right, of my country. And, that's a sad thing. Because from what I understand, the Chinese were buying up those lands and farming. The idea should be you put your people in a position to have more food and more money. If you're running a nation, that's supposed to be your main goal, right? To make sure that your people can get more food, more money, to make the fullest use of the natural resources that you have there. If you have land, you have sunshine, you have water, farm. And to see, like in my hometown, to see how that was handled, it's just crazy. The conditions for achieving these objectives, according to the declaration, are hard work and intelligence. So that intelligence brings us right back to, my point of, my stressing point of, we gotta build curriculum. In your curriculum, the process of going through a curriculum as a student, as a learner, right, is supposed to bring out the grit inside of you. Meaning that you will work hard, you will grind through, you will push through, that's that grit. And then at the other end of that is when you come through that, you come through that fight, that struggle, you come through with more intelligence, more knowledge, right? So when you create this African-centered curriculum, right, you have to have ways to get these outcomes from the curriculum, and not just from a small percentage, say 10% of the students. That's how these other folks have schools set up. The way the public school system is set up, be it here, the Caribbean, the continent, it's set up like they teach in one style and one style only. And based on that, you're filtering out a whole bunch of the student population. So that's why when you look at a lot of schools and, especially public schools and stuff, you realize like in any graduating class, there's like 2 or 3 pretty good, like really intelligent, pretty good students. And that's because in large part, the curriculum is designed in such a way, it resonates with those students better. But if you go through the rest of the student body, and you change up the way you, carry out your instruction, right? Some people learn better hands-on, for example. If you changed up the delivery of the education, right? You will see that coming out of, say, the graduating class, you'll see much more than 2 or 3 students who are really good students, right? And so that's the thing. whenever we talk about like self-determination, nation building, and whatnot, what we need to really keep in mind is that if our education is not instilling a certain character in the learners, then you won't achieve anything that you're trying to achieve in terms of nation building. It starts with the education. That takes us to this section called hard work. In hard work, it says here, and as far as I'm aware, for the first time in a major declaration by any African political organization, TANU makes a frontal attack on the traditional customs of rural life, which are characteristic in many regions. Stemming from the olden days, when the division of labor was that men were hunters and warriors and women attended to agriculture, these traditions are a major stumbling block to development. In the villages, the women work hard, at times for 12 or 14 hours a day, harder than anybody else in Tanzania. But the men who live in villages are on leave for half their lives. The energies of the millions of men in the villages are a great treasure which could contribute more towards the development of our country than anything we could get from the rich nations. To hard work must be added intelligence, right? As you move through life, you'll hear people telling you, work smarter, not harder, right? And so this statement here is really in that same vein, right? You got to be willing to put in the hard work, but smart enough, right, not to destroy yourself in the process. You got to be willing to put in the hard work to build a nation, but intelligent enough not to run yourself rugged, so that in the end the nation is weakened because you've worked yourself out. By this, TANU means the application of knowledge and good technique to work in the countryside. Hard work must be combined with good methods. Work hard, work smart, not hard, right? Hard work must be combined with good methods. Using a big hoe instead of a small hoe, using a plow pulled by oxen instead of an ordinary hoe, the use of fertilizers, the use of insecticides, knowing the right crop for a particular season or soil, choosing good seeds for planting, knowing the right time for planting, weeding, etc. All those things show the use of knowledge and intelligence. That's what I'm saying, right? This comes back to prove the point. You gotta learn how to work hard, smarter, not harder, right? You could use a small hoe and get the job done, but you're gonna work harder. Be smarter and choose the big hoe, right? You could use the hoe, or you could use some oxen to pull the plow. You could plant without fertilizers, but you got to do a lot more work to get the final product, the final crop, right? If you don't use fertilizers, you could forego the insecticides. In fact, I think we use too many in society. We use too many insecticides at this point. Anytime you see a man wearing a hazmat suit applying insecticides to crops, you know there's a problem, right? Knowing the right crop for a particular season. Hey, you don't have to know the right crop. You can plant whatever you want, but you might not get back in return what you were hoping for. So ultimately, you got to work smarter, not harder. And so the key to that is the intelligence. You have to be intelligent. You have to be armed with knowledge. To continue, the declaration points out that the good results of the 5-year development plan have sprung almost entirely from the people's efforts through such well-directed work, increasing production tremendously of cotton, cashew nuts, tobacco, and pyrethrum, and completing such development projects in the villages as the building of schools, dispensaries, community centers, roads, wells, water channels, dams, and animal dips. Thus, the declaration comes to the conclusion that at this stage, the future development of the country depends on the land, the people, the policy of socialism and self-reliance and good leadership. So if I had to edit that into what I believe in, I would say that the conclusion is the future development of the country, or I'll say the nation, depends on land, right? Land is freedom. Depends on our people. Depends on the policy of communalism, right? Self-determination and patriotic leadership. All right? To me, those are the things you want when designing your nation and its progress to continue. In our country, work should be something to be proud of, and laziness, drunkenness, and idleness should be things to be ashamed of. The people should always be ready to defend their nation when they are called upon to do so. It is necessary for everyone to work and to live on its own labor, for everybody to work for the maximum of his ability. All right? This is the concrete, immediate meaning of self-reliance. In essence, it is an attempt to build a new national conscience, a new social conscience, and a new Tanzanian man who will be the builder of Tanzanian socialism. If every individual is self-reliant, the 10-house cell will be self-reliant. If all the cells are self-reliant, the whole ward will be self-reliant. And if the wards are self-reliant, the district will be self-reliant. If the districts are self-reliant, then the region is self-reliant. And if the regions are self-reliant, then the whole nation is self-reliant. And that is our aim. And that's exactly, I think I mentioned something like that last episode, and talking about unity. You know, each one of us, those who can hear me, should be working on our families. There was someone in the chat room named Reverse, who I had a lot of conversations with during the show. And I forget what Reverse said, but my message to Reverse was, you know, work on your family. If you are bringing children into the world, if you're about to, or if you have already, you need to build them now. You need to set them right. Right? If you don't have children, but you plan to in the future, you need to be working on yourself right now. And to some extent, to a great extent, actually, we really ain't got time to talk to elders, or as only to say would say, olders, right? About trying to convert them, you know, to become builders, and you know, you just gotta leave. You know, most of them you gotta leave them where they are. The reality of it is you got to work on yourself, because if you're self-reliant, then you teach your children how to be self-reliant, right? They and you teach your grandchildren to be self-reliant, right? That's your 10-house cell. That's self-reliant. And then if you could inspire your peers or your comrades, you know, people around you, to follow in those same steps, to become self-determined, self-reliant, right? To be nation-focused, to be a builder, right? Eventually, we'll have so much people, right, within the community, right, within the districts, within the region, right? Eventually, we'll have the whole nation that's self-reliant or self-determined. So that brings us to this section called Leaders and Party. Before I read that, let me take a quick station ID break. I'll be back on the other side.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
And we're back. Make sure to tune in to all the other shows on the podcast network. And if you feel you have a voice or you have a certain take in this, under the idea of black nationalism, pan-africanism, and you want to talk about maybe hosting a podcast on the network yourself, by all means, email kwazradio at kwaz.radio@gmail.com. Let them know your intentions. Okay, so we got this part of the paper now called Leaders and Party. It is an aim that will not easily be realized. For in a country like this, educationally backward, economically undeveloped, it will need heroic endeavors. It is an aim requiring that the whole nation lift itself by its own strength. Such a task, under different but certainly no easier circumstances, has been undertaken and achieved before today in the pioneer socialist countries. But everywhere where it has been done, the key to success has been the party which led the nation, its ideology, its unity, its cohesion, its preparedness for the task. And so, having stated the aim, Tanya's declaration comes again to this basic task of leadership and of the party which must undertake it. Before I read this excerpt here, I just want to say that the writing in this declaration is so nice. Like, sometimes I'm reading some of these papers, some of these research articles to you guys, and the writing is just, but this one, the writing is succinct, it's lively at the same time. I don't know about you, but to me, I can't wait to get to the next part. And this is how, if you're going to be a writer, especially like a revolutionary type writer, this is how you should write. So the excerpt says, Tanu realizes the importance of good leadership. The problem is that we have not prepared proper plans for the training of leaders. The party headquarters is now called upon to prepare specific plans for the training of leaders from the national level down to the 10 house cells, so that all may understand our political and economic policies. And again, the National Executive Committee feels that the time has come to shift away from mere size of membership onto the quality of membership. Greater consideration must be given to the members' commitment to the beliefs and objectives of the party and its policy of socialism. When we discussed unity in the last episode, we talked about organizations, right? There is a clear sense. A lot of black organizations aim for quantity or size of membership, and they don't focus as much as they should on the quality of membership. And there's different ways you could go about, vetting and getting the, people who you don't want around out of there, right? And we talked about that last night as well. Go back and check out the episode. But the thing is, you always want to put quality first. I'll take, I've said this before, even when it comes to this show, I'll take one good quality person who's working with me to make this show get bigger and better, versus 10 people, and I mean this sincerely, versus 10 people who are in and out. I'll take one, really, solid person over 10 wishy-washy people, right? Because you could say with 10 people, man, that's enough people to really get like a bunch of things done at once. Whereas with one other person, you're still really doing, one job, right? Like you're not quite breaking it down into 10 jobs for 10 people, right? You're still really doing it as, you're sharing the responsibilities of one job now. And all I'm saying is, like, I'll take the person who's hardcore, dedicated, versus the folks who you can't depend upon as much. It's quality over the quantity. And speaking of which, I'm still looking to get someone, to volunteer to help produce the show. There's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes to produce a show like this. Even now, as I'm talking to you, I'm pushing different buttons to make things happen, even though it might seem like the show is that dynamic or whatever. So if you're out there and you're listening and you like the show, you want to see it, do better and be better, and you want to give me, some of your time, by all means, hit me up, bitter.medicine.podcast@gmail.com. In a sense, the most crucial element of the Arusha Declaration is precisely this emphasis on the concept and understanding that socialism can only be built by a vanguard party, fully committed to the scientific principles of socialism, and purged of the petty bourgeoisie, careerist, and ambitious elements who are invariably attracted to the ranks of any ruling party. You really have to be careful of those types of people in anything that we do, especially in the things that we do. We have observed precisely this problem in other countries of Africa, where socialist goals have been announced, but no practical steps have been taken towards their realization, or where a genuinely socialist-oriented leadership has actually taken decisions favoring the workers and peasants, and such decisions have been sabotaged in practice by local party and state officials who saw in state enterprises and cooperatives merely an opportunity for enriching themselves. The dangers and difficulties are increased a great deal by the fact that the ruling parties were not originally class parties of workers and peasants aimed to achieve socialism. They were mass, all-class parties, including the working people and also bourgeoisie and petty bourgeoisie, feudalists and tribalist leaders, united not for socialism but for the common goal of ousting colonialist direct rule and gaining constitutional independence. Not abstract theory, but the reality of the struggle has taught honest African patriots that formal independence is not enough, that the capitalist road is incompatible with real independence, that only the advance to socialism can secure the gains of the African Revolution and satisfy the needs and aspirations of the masses. But we have also learned, and here again, not from theoretical generalization, but from experience, that taking this hard road involves bitter class struggles against those privileged strata and classes within African society who are satisfied with the status quo, who prefer the capitalist road and are even prepared to collaborate with foreign imperialism at the cost of independence to secure their selfish, personal, and class objectives. We've talked about this in recent episodes. The elite, the African elite, have sold out Africa. Sorry, just taking a drink of water. Such class struggles, requiring the political enlightenment and participation of the masses, cannot be led by the old-style mass movements, deeply penetrated at all levels by capitalists, feudalists, and self-seeking, careerist, bureaucratic elements. Either a new political vanguard must emerge, a workers' and peasants' party imbued with and dedicated to the principles of scientific socialism, or conscious and vigorous efforts must be made to transform the national liberation movement into just such a party by raising its ideological level and weeding out all elements hostile to socialism from every position of leadership and authority. It is the second alternative that TANU has chosen. In the long run, it is not just socialist declarations and decisions taken at top level that will count. It is the success or failure of the Arusha Resolution, operative Part 5 of the Declaration, which in effect is devoted into transforming TANU into a peasants' and workers' socialist party. And it is here that the Declaration is at its most specific. Every TANU and government leader, it states, must be either a peasant or a worker, and should in no way be associated with the practices of capitalism or feudalism. What gives additional confidence that this resolution means business is that the term leader is precisely defined. It comprises executive members of TANU, cabinet ministers, and PMS, senior officials, I guess that's members of parliament, senior officials of affiliated TANU organizations, and para-statal organs, all those appointed or elected in terms of the TANU constitution, councillors and civil servants in high and middle cadres. For good measure, it is added that the prohibitions listed apply not only to the men or women involved, but also to their wives or husbands. The prohibitions are formidable. No TANU or government leader may, 1, hold shares in any company, 2, hold directorships in any privately owned enterprise, 3, receive 2 or more salaries, and 4, own houses which he rents to others. That brings us to this section called Corruption is Treason. The emphasis on personal austerity of party and state leaders may seem unwarranted to those who think in terms of the affluent societies of Western Europe and North America, where public corruption is on so vast a scale, with enormous monopolies holding governments in the palm of their hands, that the seizing of small advantages by politicians passes almost unnoticed. In our African countries, the problem is of a different order. And I talked about that just before election time. When you vote, right, like I've said before, and you see it better in smaller countries, but you're voting to give people an opportunity to be in the driver's seat of the nation. What comes with being in the driver's seat of the nation is the ability to cut deals above table, under the table, deals for your personal interests. And like I said in the past, even a much maligned country like Haiti, right? In Haiti's government, there's money. There's deals being made. And folks are making that money, right? And what I've said, and I've said this since I was in my hometown, looking at the conditions of the neighborhood that never changed from one election to the next, right? Is that if I'm going to vote you in, right, giving you your chance to profiteer off of your position, The least you can do is do something here and there for the people in the constituency that voted you in. And along those lines, you know, you take a guy like Cory Booker here, you know, over there in New Jersey. When Cory Booker them are fighting, you know, for you to vote for them in the primaries and all this bullshit, Cory Booker quietly is making huge sums of money from pharmaceutical companies. And no one talks about it. Someone finally brought it up about 8 years ago, right? I think it's in Obama's last term. Someone brought up, like, look all this money Cory Booker is making off these pharmaceutical companies in New Jersey, right? And so, you know, this part of the paper reminds me of, like, of that fact. Like, there's so many people who are telling you to vote this way and don't vote that way, but look at their finances. It's something that goes unnoticed. These guys are making dollars. Look at Roland Martin's bank account, if possible. And I bet you there's a lot of Democrats putting money in Roland's coffers, in his Ascot coffers. But it's something, and it's largely unseen, right? Because of how corrupt and monopolistic, you know, America is, North America is. One of the besetting troubles in the independent states of Africa has been the fact that so many of the lively, the ambitious, and the energetic have been lured from the path of duty to the people and to Africa by the lust for personal enrichment and aggrandizement. This alien infection, the bourgeoisie ethic of individual acquisitiveness, regardless of the cost to others, has spread in Africa, mainly by the former colonial masters. Right? Harmful enough in their own countries, it can be a devastating epidemic in societies where millions lack the elementary needs of a decent life and even food. Personal wealth, even when puny by European capitalist standards, provides a glaring contrast in a country like Tanzania, where wage rates average £8 per month, right? And this is in 1964, right? £8.16 per month in 1964. Advantages which in advance, so in yeah, so that's like, okay. Advantages which in advanced capitalist society are regarded as fairly trivial, perks of office or prominence, high salaries for parliamentarians, membership of a board of directors, inside information about economic development plans, have proved vastly corrupting in every African country, precisely because they offer wealth on a scale which is huge in comparison with the mass poverty everywhere outside the ranks of the privileged. Certainly in countries whose future depends on the mobilizing of a gigantic effort by the masses to attain the high road of true independence, advancing to socialism, the existence of widespread racketeering and ostentatious wealth among leaders and officials can be utterly demoralizing, endangering not only progressive plans, but even the stability and security of a progressive government. And, you know, that's the thing, too. What, like, if you're building this nation on socialism, what do you do with the already capitalists, the bourgeoisie, right, the elites? What do you do with them? Tanu, I think, is quite correct In contrast to certain other African leading parties, it places such stress on the need for integrity and personal modesty in the lives of public leaders and officials, and fights against the sort of corruption which turns political leaders, former patriots, and party activists into petty careerists, aiming at antisocial goals of personal enrichment at the expense of the nation. To this theme, President Julius Nyerere has returned over and over again in his speeches for many years. Quote, "I believe myself, corruption in a country should be treated almost in the same way as you treat treason. We have got to have people in local government, in the trade unions, in the cooperative movement, in the political organizations, in the civil service, and in the government itself, in whom our people have absolute confidence. If we can't have it, then I cannot see how the people of Tanganyika are going to get the true benefits of the independence for which they have been struggling." That's what I was saying before. You have to have someone who you can have absolute confidence in. At least one person. That's better than 10 wishy-washy people. Thus, the fight against personal corruption in Tanzania is not a new thing. It's been the hallmark of Thai new leadership and that of President Nyerere in particular for many years. But in the context of the Arusha Declaration, this fight acquires a new dimension. It is not just bribery and graft which are the enemy. It is a question of forging a party of a new type. It must be a party utterly dedicated with singleness of purpose. It must be a party of devoted workers for the cause of socialism, who not only teach socialist principles, but also practice them. It must be a party of peasants and workers, whose leaders are free from the corrupting influence of exploitation and have no stake in capitalism. When I was talking about Cory Booker earlier, and you look at his money and where it comes from, the pharmaceutical companies. If you're in STEM and you work in STEM, you know that New Jersey is like a big deal in the pharmaceutical arena. And it's Cory Booker who has allowed a lot of that to happen. And what actually happens too is like certain regulations can be voted against, right? Because Cory is in the pocket. A couple years ago, there was some pharmaceutical company dumping waste in the river or something there, and it had gone unnoticed for like a while, right? Folks were paid to turn a blind eye, right? This is why you need someone, at least one person in the organization, in the government, who's a writer, right? Who will stand for you to the bitter end. And in fact, this is what we need as people, as families. We need this type of person in our families. I have a friend, a sister who, when we met, she was telling me about the difficulty she's had in finding other conscious black women in her locale, or I guess even online for that matter, right? And that's the thing, like, we should always have some solid, upright African around us, male and or female. And so that's the other thing that we need to do towards unity, right? Be the stand-up person for others. Be that person you could go to and lean on for knowledge or, directions to resources or what have you. We need more of that. In white society, they have this term, I got a guy for that, right? It used to be huge, and now it's kind of been sunken in with the whole concept of networking and all that stuff. But at one time in white society, those folks had a guy, quote unquote, a guy for everything. You want to get your jewelry clean? I got a guy. You want to get your lawn mowed down? I got a guy. How many of you have a guy for various aspects of life? How many of you have a guy for economics? You know, for spirituality. I'm talking about someone you could call on at any time, right? Or someone you could call on behalf of somebody else. We need more of that, right? Ultimately, the conquest of the inspiring goals of Arusha will depend on whether TANU can successfully transform itself into just such a new type party, a peasants and workers' party of socialism. Of all the formidable tasks which TANU has taken on in its new phase since Arusha, the building of a party composed of dedicated socialists, ideologically trained and mature, and ready to carry out the active task of mobilizing an entire people, is perhaps the most challenging. There was a great deal, both in the record and style of work of TANU and the Arusha Declaration itself, which inspires confidence that this formidable task will be surmounted. Like every active political organization, especially those in Africa, where we are sailing uncharted waters and tackling unprecedented tasks, TANU has made its mistakes. Some of them are frankly dealt with and admitted in the declaration itself. The very fact that they are admitted, analyzed, and dealt with seriously is the most striking indication of the fundamental soundness and honesty of TANU. The complex and profound problems of independent African development call for original solutions, and the study and recognition of our realities in a spirit of scholarly humility. They will never be solved by those, however brilliant, who rely on generalities, consider they know all the answers in advance, and refuse to learn and grow with their experiences. That's an important point. That's an important point for we as people, right? However brilliant you are, can't solve these problems with generalities. You can't feel like you have all the answers in advance, and so you don't hear what others have to say. That's one of our biggest issues. This is why I talked about it again last episode. This is why we have all these different splinter groups and factions and all this type of stuff. Right? You disagree with one thing here, so you write it off. You destroy it. You try to build something in its stead. We have to, we have to fall back on that type of stuff. The real impetus for Tanzania's new revolution comes from the urgent economic needs of the country. It is plain to anyone reading the Arusha document that it did not proceed from theoretical conceptions, but was forged directly on the anvil of experience in Tanzania itself. It sprang from the hard and real struggle between those who speak for the working masses and are pressing forward socialism, and those whose socialism is confined to lip service, while in practice they veer towards capitalism and privilege. The experiences of independence, its problems and challenges, lead African patriots irresistibly to the scientific socialism of Marx, not by reference to theory, but through honest striving to overcome the problems set by their own lives. The language of Arusha is straightforward and direct. It is not couched in philosophical terminology, but speaks to the plain man in words he cannot understand. There might be some who consider themselves communists, who might complain that the language of Arusha does not conform with the classical formulations of Marx and Lenin, or that the detailed program differs from that of scientific socialists in other countries. I think they are wrong on both counts. In the first place, if African leaders who do not start out from the premise of Marxism, Leninism, nevertheless find themselves impelled to adopt more and more of its major thesis in order to secure the genuine independence and welfare of the masses, this is not a criticism of those leaders. It is rather a tribute to their honesty, patriotism, and concern for the toiling masses. It is also the greatest possible tribute to the universal validity of scientific socialism, proved again in the harshest of all tests, that of practice and struggle. This and not questions of formulation is what counts. In any case, socialism in Africa must learn to speak the language of Africa. And to that I would add, if that's the case, then you might as well just use what Africa has already. Communalism. Anyone who does not recognize these things is not a Marxist, but an armchair pedant. Secondly, scientific socialism is a method for finding the solution to real problems, not a set of formulae applicable to all problems. It will be absurd to expect to find programs in Africa identical to those for the quite different problems of Europe or even of Asia. For that matter, the problems will differ from one country or region of our continent according to varying conditions. And in each case, they can and will also be solved by the African socialists of each region. Arusha does not mark the beginning of Tanu's socialism, and it most certainly does not mark the end. There are many more problems to be solved, and much more to be said. But this historic declaration does mark a very crucial and notable turning point in the evolution of Tanzanian socialism. To use a phrase of Engels, quote, "From utopia to science," it is the incoming age of socialism in East Africa, which is bound to have far-reaching effects over a very wide area and a long period of time. The vital hill to be climbed now in Tanzania's ascent to the summit of socialism is the building of a leading party of active socialists, organizers, teachers, and leaders. Arusha marks the beginning of the assault on that hill. Tanzania's pioneering efforts and progress towards the summit will be watched with the keenest interest by all Africa, and aided with all their strength by all those socialists whose outlook is broad enough not to demand that every socialist effort conforms precisely with their own preconceptions, their own formulations, and their own slogans. And that's the end of the paper. Let me just show you. Let me pull this up. You know what? I'm gonna pull it from Wikipedia. A little bit more accessible. Why isn't this working? Okay. Okay, so it might be a little difficult for you to see. Let me see. But if you're live with me right now, you can see on the screen You can see on the screen, the Wikipedia page for the Arusha Declaration. And it tells you that in part 1 of the Arusha Declaration, the TANU Creed outlines the principles of socialism and the role of government, right? So there's this like a list here that says that all human beings are equal, that every individual has a right to dignity and respect, that every citizen is an integral part of the nation and has a right to take an equal part in government at local, regional, and national level, that every citizen has a right to freedom of expression, of movement, of religion, of religious belief and of association within the context of the law, that every individual has a right to receive from society protection of his life and of property according to the law, that every citizen has a right to receive a just return for his labor, that all citizens together possess all the natural resources of the country in trust for their descendants, that in order to ensure economic justice, the state must have effective control over the principal means of production, and that it is the responsibility of the state to intervene actively in the economic life of the nation, so as to ensure that well-being of all citizens, and so as to prevent the exploitation of one person by another or one group by another, and so as to prevent the accumulation of wealth to an extent which is inconsistent with a classless society. The aims and objects of the Arusha Declaration are to consolidate and maintain the independence of this country and the freedom of its people, to safeguard the inherent dignity of the individual in accordance with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, to ensure that this country shall be governed by a democratic socialist government of the people, to cooperate with all the political parties in Africa engaged in the liberation of Africa, to see that the government mobilizes the resources of this country towards the elimination of poverty, ignorance, and disease, to see that the government actively assists in the formation and maintenance of cooperative organizations, to see that wherever possible, the government itself directly participates in the economic development of this country, to see that the government gives equal opportunity to all men and women, irrespective of race, religion, or status, to see that the government eradicates all types of exploitation, intimidation, discrimination, bribery, and corruption, to see that the government exercises effective control over the principal means of production and pursues policies which facilitates the way to collective ownership of the resources of this country, to see that the government cooperates with other states in Africa in bringing about African unity, and lastly, to see that the government works tirelessly towards world peace and security through the United Nations organization. So that's the aims and objectives of the Arusha Declaration. And part 1 of the declaration is the creed, which we pretty much went over in that reading. Anyway, that's the end of the paper. It seems like it's a quiet night in the chat room. No worries, though. I appreciate you all. Thank you all for joining me again. Once again, make sure to check out all the other shows on the podcast network, KWAZ Radio Podcast Network. You had Onitase earlier today, did his worship. Great episode. Kind of a somber tone, I don't know why, but great episode. There's a piece in there about dating that I thought was really interesting. It aligns with my own thinking on dating and stuff, so you should check it out. The Queen's Council recently dropped an episode. Make sure to check her out. And the Harsh Reality Podcast is probably putting together a new episode right now, so make sure to check those out. Anyway, guys, until tomorrow night, 8 p.m., day 3 of Kwanzaa. We'll be doing another show at 8 p.m. tomorrow night. Until then, peace.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.